Okay, video 4 of our introduction to research. So we've talked about paradigms, we've talked about positivists, we've talked about interpretivists. Critical we've also talked about, and that's an area we could look into if we wanted to dig deeper. Okay, as I said earlier, there's lots of different philosophical approaches underneath each of these, but generally you're good to go if you understand these two approaches to understanding the world of education. Now, as I alluded to earlier, once we understand kind of a paradigm, now we start to talk about methodology. Okay, what kind of research design are we going to get into? And when I talk about research design, we have experimental, we have quasi-experimental, we have case study research, we have action research, we have phenomenological research or phenomenology. There's lots of different research designs, and these are the general approach to how are we going to set up our study. All right, so we have our paradigm, our ways of thinking, and that's kind of our broadest sense. And we're going to narrow this in the next step down to our research design. Now you'll notice I haven't said anything about quantitative qualitative. All right, quantitative qualitative we'll get into in a little bit, but right now we're talking about research design. How do you set up, what is your general framework for approaching the questions that you ask? All right. Now, in other areas, we'll talk about developing questions. Okay, and generally in research, we like those questions to be generated out of existing literature. All right, action research is a little bit different, and you're going to have a whole different set of information on action research, and we have some materials to understand action research. So I'm trying to contextualize this whole thing, but action research is it's a method. It's an approach to answering a question. It's not quantitative qualitative. We're not there yet. Okay, it's more about how do you go about trying to answer a question. So an experimental study you can see would be on kind of on this side of the spectrum with experimental or with positivist research. Okay, because it's going to set up an experiment. Now, when you talk about things like does this approach does it improve student test scores? Okay, that is code language or underlying language that would say you've done an experimental study. You have a positivist mindset. You believe that we can prove or disprove whether or not this particular approach improves student test scores, and you're going to set up an experiment. And experimental studies have their own its own beast. It's complicated. It's controlled. Okay, a good experimental study is controlled. And we have controls, and we have sampling, and we have double blind, and that those would be experimental, and so the students don't know that they're the treatment's much different, and then they're tested on that, and we have to have validity and reliability of our measurements of our instruments. Okay, that's all experimental. So don't get sucked too far into that, because that is a whole different kind of research than tying this back to our action research for our program and for what you're doing. Okay, so we have quasi-experimental, which would take us a while to get into and explain all that, but it's related to the experimental approach. We have case study research. Case study research is a whole different approach to studying studying a specific case. Okay, studying and looking at all different angles of a particular case and what's happening around a specific case. So you see this a lot in when a new program is implemented. Okay, or you see and program evaluation is an entirely different research approach. Okay, and that these are all methods that you can use to approach the answering of a question. Okay, and so case study research, as we were talking about, that's kind of a what happened here. Okay, action research, again, I'm not going to get into it here, but that's another methodology. Okay, so now we understand paradigms. Now we understand that there's methodology. And I know we haven't spent a lot of time on that, so I can't say that you understand it, so to speak, but you understand the concept. Paradigms, ways of looking at the world, that's going to influence the kind of methodology that you set up. Okay, so a positivist isn't going to have a lot of interest in phenomenological research, which is how do people experience a particular phenomenon. They're not really interested in that because they can't really prove anything, because that has more to do with one person than their experience. Okay, so we have paradigms that influence methodology. Okay, next we're going to get into the next phase, or the next decision-making point in that process.